Okay, so the drum being the center of indigenous cultures means that that drum is a focal point. We have a drum right over here. Hand drum, you can see that it's guarded actually by that sage on top of it. The drum is incredibly spiritual. It literally means the heartbeat of the culture. It's the focal point of indigenous cultures, especially the cultures in North America, but I have yet to see a culture anywhere in the world where the drum is not the focal point. The drum does all kinds of things. It summons spirits, it works as medicine. If you've read anything about drumming, you'll recognize that the methodical beats of the drum are very medicinal. They use these kind of techniques across cultures. And the methodic tempo of the drum transcends existence. So it goes from the physical to the intellectual to the emotional to the spiritual, and then back again. The drum sits in the center, and it should sit in the center. It's just like the heart. Our heart sits in the center of our body. The men are the drummers. The men would sit around with that big drum anyway. Women play the hand drums with that big drum. The men support the drum. The men drum. The women, who in our culture use shakers, and we have quite a few of those up there too, right underneath. Usually the women will use the shakers and support the men who support the drum. Then there's the community. The community will be around the women who support the men who support the drum, who supports the men who support the women who support the community, who support the women who support, so it's cyclical. Just like the levels of intellect are also cyclical. The physical, the intellectual, the emotional, and the spiritual all intermesh and are all enacted in this realm in which we live. One of the things that people who aren't very spiritual don't see is that spiritual realm that's constantly going on as we speak. So our belief is that we're always operating within these four realms. We're always physically here, we're always intellectually here, we're always emotionally here, and we're always very spiritually here. And it's important that all four of those realms work simultaneously and work together with one another. Here's a case in point. Not long ago, well actually it's getting to be long ago, it's about 15 years ago, a young guy came to us and said that he felt like committing suicide. So right away we're thinking, well, something's not working right with the way he's thinking. In almost all indigenous cultures, it's very important that those four realms move simultaneously. If one of those elements, in other words, if either the physical, the intellectual, the emotional, or the spiritual aren't going at the same pace within the realm of your life, that's when conflict inside you starts. So the objective in indigenous cultures, the spiritual objective would be to get all of those things back in order. So the first thing that I asked him was, well, tell me about your life. Tell me about what's going on. And he just told me some real superficial things. As most people do, as you're going to find out story after story. I'm not interested in that. Tell me about something in your life. What happened? What happened in your life that caused one of these four elements to all of a sudden stop moving forward? Now, some of you might be thinking right now, oh, this is interesting because that's the same as Western psychology. And it's very close. You have to be kind of in balance. Very important. We talked about balance briefly already in this class. Balance is important. Very important. So as these elements are moving through life, I'm trying to figure out why one of those stopped for him. And he kept saying nothing was wrong. So I kept kind of probing him a little bit, asking him questions. Well, there's a couple things that are going on in his life that the people around him were pretty sure of, but we didn't know about some of the history. First thing off is that he was homosexual. He was a gay man. Now, no matter what anybody says, it's very difficult to live being a homosexual. Highest rate of suicide, very difficult, facing lots and lots of obstacles, especially in the Midwest, the Bible Belt. Second thing he said was, well, I don't know, my mom and dad divorced. And I looked at him, and I wanted this to stick with him. And I said, "You mean to tell me that wasn't something that was at the top of your list?" He said, "Well, yeah, my mom and dad divorced." And I says, "Okay." And he says, then I asked, "Well, have you had any dreams about it?" I want to get what's in his subconscious, because the dreams that you have are generally from your subconscious. And that's across the board. That's with just about every culture, every realm of psychology, all that stuff. Well, Indian people have always known that. The dreams are telling you what's going on in your life and what's going to go on in your life if we get further into it, which we will a little bit later. So, he tells me, "Well, I had this dream not long ago that I remember." And I said, "Well, tell me about it." He says, "I went into this really strange house," he said. And in dreams, when we have people who are floating, they always float like this with their head down. And they'll move through the house like this. So what he did is he described this house. So there's the bathroom, bedroom, this is the hall. This was the steps that actually went downstairs. This was the kitchen, dining room, and the living space. And he said what happened in this dream is he came in this house, which was right here, and he started going along the walls, floating like this. And he says all he could see was the floor plan and the walls as he was going. And he said as he got here, in this corner, there was a woman standing there in his dream. And he described this woman as wearing a bright yellow dress with big bracelets, and she had puffed up hair that was worn up. And the other thing he said is she had freckles. She was very fair skinned. Then he describes, he says he goes back to the doorway and he leaves the house and he wakes up. But he says the whole time he was dreaming that, he said he had this kind of burning feeling, very, very warm feeling. I said, "Well, you mean like physically warm, or you had this kind of emotionally warm feeling?" And he said, "Both." So, I said, "Do you remember that house from anywhere?" And at first he said, "Not really, no, not." And then all of a sudden it dawned on him that it was very, very close to the house that he lived in when his mom and dad were getting a divorce. Makes sense to me. So, I said, "Do you remember where that house is?" He said, "No, but I think my mom could tell me." So he goes back and he talks to his mother. And his mother gives him the address of the house. So, not the next week, but the following Saturday, we decide to go to the house. And we drive up and we pull in the driveway, which is off to the right, and there's a little garage there, and there's a dog barking behind the garage really loud. So we get out of the car and we go up to the door. We knock on the door, and this woman answers the door, and she's wearing a bright yellow dress, bracelets, her hair's up, and she's got freckles. And he lost it. His legs buckled on him, and he fell about 3 steps down on the steps. The woman came out and goes, "Are you all right?" and all this kind of stuff. And he actually ended up breaking part of his elbow. He hit his elbow on the hard steps. Wasn't saying that at the time. So, the woman says, "Can I help you with something? I mean, what's going on here?" I said, "Well, he used to live here. And he had a dream about the place, and we were wondering if we could just go in and see it." He wouldn't go in. It was a place. He wouldn't go in. She said that he bought it, or she bought it from his mom. So we went back to a lodge up there. We have a day-old lodge up there, and I lit my pipe and started talking to him, and we smoked the pipe a couple times, and he told me that all of a sudden out of nowhere, he says, "You know something? That's where a lot of stuff happened." You see, his dad was homosexual. And his mom would ridicule his dad, right, in front of him. Now he's thinking that he's gay, and he's listening to how his mom feels about gays. You see where this is going? So what he's developing is this kind of realm of self-hate. Something, by the way, that Indians are very, very accustomed to, because we've always been looked at as the bad guy, no matter what. We've always been the bad guy. And a lot of us are caught in that realm of still thinking we're the bad guy. In Westerns, on TV, in the history books, you name it. We're always the bad guy. So we get that kind of complex about ourselves. So he had this trauma. And the trauma was kind of ongoing. So the thing that we decided to do was we decided to do a ceremony in the Sweat Lodge that following weekend. And we had Toba Sanakwat come down from Canada to conduct the ceremony. And what he did was actually brought him back in time to when all of that happened via the ceremony. And kind of straightened it out there, and then he brought him back forward again. That's one of the ways in which we're going to talk about the shell shaker ceremony after a while. But when he went forward, he straightened it out, and it was an emotional kind of stagnation. So what we did in that particular case was get his 4 elements moving forward again. And I think that that probably saved his life, because he'd been talking to other friends, we found out, about suicide. He was incredibly depressed. He was able to let go of some of the things that his mom had said, and some of those things that had been boiling and boiling and boiling inside him for years and years and years and years. It's kind of like, you haven't come out of the closet yet, and you hear all your friends constantly talking about gay this, gay that, hating gays, all that kind of stuff, right? And on top of that, he was an Indian. And culturally, if you're around a lot of ignorant Indians, it doesn't mix at all. However, spiritually, it really does. There's not a lot of, there's not a big problem with being gay in Indian culture. But you still have these ignorant people in Indian culture who will constantly ridicule you. Here's the problem. When that's around you in this dysfunctional culture, you can't really come out as being gay. And you're also, because of the hatred around you, not wanting to be Indian either. Because you're shying away from that kind of behavior. Something that's very, very prominent in indigenous cultures on the reds. A lot of Indian people have shielded themselves from their traditions because of a lot of the shame that's happened throughout the history of Indian people. A lot of that kind of hatred stuff, those kinds of things. So, that's one of the interesting things about this, is you kind of have to move forward in balance. And that's a very, very staunch belief in indigenous cultures. What the drum represents, as it sounds itself, is the connectedness of all things. One of the interesting ceremonies that we go through when we go to Sundance is the drumming. When we go to Big Drum, it's the drumming. And what it is that everybody in the place, and sometimes there's 400 or 500 people at Big Drum ceremonies, everybody in the place becomes connected because everybody's hearing that one beat. So we're all of one heart. See what I'm saying? We're all of one heart. At a powwow, when the drum groups are going, everybody in the place is of one heart. Everybody is connected. Our belief is that everybody's connected all the time. On that medicine wheel, that's what that stands for. That's why we have those 4 colors of the 4 races on the medicine wheel. Because everybody is connected and everybody is on one equal plane. The other thing that we like to talk about and have to talk about is every single decision leads to the next. When you look back throughout your whole life, you've made tens of thousands of decisions already. Any one of those decisions were made differently, you might not be here. Everything leads to the next. Everything is connected. All of the decisions that you made with somebody else, all of the decisions that you made yourself, all of the decisions that were made as a community, everything comes into play and alters your path through life when it does. Even the smallest decision. Do I leave at 5 o'clock or do I leave at 5:10? I can't tell you how many times over the years people have said, well, I don't know why I took this different way this time. I never take this different way. Ended up getting in an accident. Taking a different way. Well, if you would have taken the other way, and what happens is a lot of people think that's just mere coincidence. Indigenous cultures, indigenous people do not believe in coincidence. Everything happens for a reason. And everything is connected. Every person is connected. Everybody in this room is connected. You trace us back far enough, we all got the same mom and dad. They're probably little creatures that crawled out of something. Every person is connected. Not just connected though, but connected at all four of those levels. We're all physically here. We're all intellectually here. We're all emotionally here, and we're all spiritually here. All of these levels are constantly operating all the time. If we tap into them, we're able to reach different levels of intellect. If we don't, we don't. And all things are associated with the Creator. And what the Creator is I've already told you this, it's kind of that, it's internal. It's inside, according to indigenous cultures. The Creator's in all of us. That's what the Creator would represent. It's that time that we spend growing old. It's whatever's perpetuating us and making us grow old on that daily basis. It's that energy. It's the energy that makes the world turn. It's the energy that makes the sun turn. It's the energy that makes the wind blow. Where is that energy? Where is that engine? That, folks, is what we would call the Creator. Wherever that is, whatever that is, that perpetuating force that moves everything forward, that makes everything age. I'm not sure what that is. We call that the Creator, and it's inside of us. That's why we start as a baby and we die as a baby. Everything's connected. So, what that energy would be is kind of an inertia. We talked a little bit about inertia in the past. It's that thing that moves everything forward. And scientifically, inertia is the description of something that will move constantly until it's stopped. Or it will stay in place until it's pushed. Inertia. So, we believe in the four levels of inertia. The physical inertia. Physically, we're moving through the world. An example of physical inertia in the spiritual realm. How many people have been in a zone? You know you've been in a zone. When I was in athletics, I was in a zone. Kind of a lot, right? It's where I don't know what happened that particular day. I couldn't miss a shot. I couldn't miss a rebound. Every pass worked. I don't know what happened. It's not me. I remember boxing, being in a zone. The minute I entered the ring, I entered this zone, and I really don't remember anything that went on outside the ring, even though everything was there. I just don't remember. I was so incredibly focused that it's just hard to explain, but I'm sure that all of us have kind of been in that zone. What about that intellectual zone? There's an author named Csikszentmihalyi who wrote a book called Flow. And if you're really into this kind of thing, that's a great book to get. He calls it flow. We call it an intellectual zone. You're in this mental state of operation in which a person performing the activity is fully immersed in a feeling of energized focus, full involvement and enjoyment in the process of the activity. How many people have been there? You all have. Raise your hands. How many people know that they've truly been there? You have. There's a period in time when you just are so focused on doing something, it just happens. Homework. All of a sudden it clicks. Bang, there you are. You're home. Sooner or later, you're probably getting a bit of either that or you'll struggle through the whole thing. But with the group projects, the zone. With the storybooks, the zone. And we're going to talk about these things when that comes. We're going to talk about how you were feeling when you got it going, right? There's that emotional inertia. Everybody in here has been at a movie or seen a movie or been someplace where they just can't help but start bawling their eyes out. Or you see something. The other thing that I really have a hard time with is when one guy or one woman will step up and carry the ball for an entire community. See, I'm even getting emotional talking about it. One guy steps up and says, we can get this done. Or one guy, and there's countless cases of this, where one guy, in the service, one guy steps up and takes control, and all of a sudden, the firefight ends for any number of reasons. That kind of thing is one of those things that gets me all the time. And I know that everybody has those kinds of things. It's a natural process. It's an emotional state that just starts coming through. And sometimes at the most inopportune times. Emotional inertia, you just can't help it. Then there's this spiritual inertia. Spiritual inertia. Talking about the drum. As most people think of their life on a line. They're born here, 10 years old, 20 years old, 30 years old, 40 years old, 50, 60. And they think of their life on a number line that way. Indian people don't think that way. From a traditional perspective, I'm the drum. I am that drum. Then there's the people around me who support me, and the people around them who support them, and then there's everybody else. Have you heard that before someplace? And I don't move in a number line, I move out. I don't move straight. All of me is expanding in more ways than one. All of me is expanding outward. Physically, intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually. So, what I'm talking about then would be myself. Then I'm talking about a ring like this, a ring like this, and a ring like this. What a coincidence. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 stages of life in indigenous culture. There's the baby, there's the kid or adolescent, there's the adult, and there's the elder stage. We are constantly moving through these stages. And for indigenous people, that's okay. It's an honor to move through these stages. And again, we go full circle. Because when we're elders, we're taken care of just like we are when we're babies. Elders are the most important people in indigenous culture. They're the ones with the wisdom. They're the storytellers. They're the ones that carry the tribe's history. They're the ones that carry the spiritual beliefs. They're everything to us. So they eat first. Remember I was telling you about the ceremonies and stuff? Thanksgiving? Remember that? You guys got to nod or shake or do something so I know. So that it's really, and it becomes a values issue. What do you value the most? Well, I have no problem with people valuing the dominant culture's value of children, because we value children too. We just have to make sure that the people who are truly valued are the people with the wisdom. And that would be our elders. And as we move through those 4 stages of life, outward in every direction, to the east is wisdom, to the south is birth, to the west is death, and to the north is healing. We're always moving in those directions. We always need healing. We always need everything that we move toward. In those directions lies the sacred animals that help us along the way. When we get an Indian name, that Indian name resides at the end of our life. And we're constantly moving toward the acquisition or the honor of obtaining the characteristics of whatever our Indian name is. Whether it's Thunderbird, whether it's Big Rock, whatever it is. That's what we're constantly moving toward. Very, very important aspect of life. The other thing that's very, very important is to understand this notion of past, present, and future does not exist in indigenous cultures. It's an ever-present now. It's not the number line, where we're moving from the old to the new. What it is an ever-expanding way of living. It's constantly moving out in all 4 directions. The physical, the emotional, the intellectual, and the spiritual. We're constantly moving into those directions and into those realms. Interesting, and I often wonder where some of these scientists get these notions. The space-time continuum is very interesting to me. Because what it does is it reflects a lot of old Indian teachings about not being a past or present, because it talks about light. And we know from Einstein that if you follow the path of light, right, if you go far enough, and if you look back, the dinosaurs still exist. As when I'm looking at you, what I'm seeing is light. Your image is coming toward me. I'm seeing you through my lens, but it's light that's coming through my lens. If you move far enough out in space and look back, you're seeing history. But it's not history because it's still there, because you're ahead of it. So as you look back, you're still seeing the dinosaurs. You're still seeing the 1800s, the 1600s, the 1500s, and so on and so forth, because you're staying ahead of the light that's moving out. That's an indigenous belief. There is no past, present, or future. There's only the ever-expanding now. And everybody that's come before us, if we go out into space someplace, we can look back and see them. Our belief is that you travel the Milky Way until you get ahead of the light, where you see your ancestors are doing. Whoa. All of a sudden it makes sense, doesn't it? There's no past, present, or future. It's all an encompassing now in traditional indigenous. Oddly, that's what my buddy the priest says too. When you're in heaven, you're on earth. You're walking a life that's guilt-free. Remember when we talked about that? His interpretation of heaven and hell? Obviously, not getting ahead of that light might not be heaven, right? Ooh. And when you talk to deep biblical scholars who really study religion, that's what they're going to tell you. If you talk to those scholars, it says all through the Bible that you don't institutionalize spirituality, because spirituality can't be in a framework. Well, what's the institutionalization of spirituality? Religion. It says that all through the Bible. And I didn't even know that. I mean, I've read the Bible a couple times. But it took my priest friend to actually tell me that. That's what indigenous people realize. At least from their own lens. Not saying it's right, wrong, or indifferent. Remember, this isn't personal. This is me explaining my belief system. The best way for me to explain it to you is to explain it in a realm that you'll understand. Because I could be explaining this all in Ojibwe right now, which would make it a whole lot easier because there's words that actually say it. When we're talking about the sweat lodge, that womb inside the sweat lodge is the drum. The drum would be the heartbeat of that sweat lodge. That's where everything comes from. That's what makes everything go. So it might be the creator. What scares people so much, especially Indian people, is what I'm talking about today just makes too much sense. And it scares the hell out of people. No pun intended. It does. It scares people to death. Things spiritually that make sense scare people. Because most people think that that's something they don't have their hands on. But it's something that, according to our culture, you're supposed to work toward your entire life. You never quite get there until the second you die. Then you're okay. Because to think you know everything is, first off, it's really arrogant. Right? And secondly, it's stupid because you're never going to know everything. It's just plain stupid. You just can't know everything. So right now in our cultures, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get people to a point where they start to understand these things so they can get a hold of their life and start feeling Indian again and start feeling proud, not bad guys. That's why it's so important for you to learn this stuff, so you're not teaching everybody in those classes that Indians were the bad guys. Oh, poor Custer, right? As his men cut the babies out of women and tossed them around like balls. Poor Custer. But in the history books, we were the bad guys. All we were doing is protecting our land, for God's sake. I'd fight fiercely for my house. Someone was breaking in, had a blowtorch, gonna burn it down. Not in my watch. Sweat lodge, have people come there and break down in tears just by looking at it. I can't believe they're there. Where has this been all my life? This belongs to you, I say. This is yours. And to see them fall to their knees is one of those things that I'm telling you, it gets me really emotional. It's the first time they've ever had anything that they could call their own that's going to help them. When people go to reservations on missions, oh man, get that stuff out of them. Again, nothing personal. You may have been on missions in here. It's not personal, right? You're doing what you think is right, and I'm glad you do that. By the way, there's an organization that you might want to check into. It's a magnificent organization. Have you heard of it? Habitat for Humanity? It just gives his whole life to it. It's an amazing story, especially how old he is. He's still pounding nails. An ex-president. Standing side by side with poor kids. And what a remarkable man he is and was. Let's get into the metaphysical and what we believe as part of our metaphysics. We got a call one time. In fact, I was in the Perkins in Bemidji, Minnesota. A phone call. Answer the phone. There's a woman just north of Ely, Minnesota, which is up on the Canadian border. It's way the heck up there. Who's having issues about seeing things in her house. And she says that her house is cold, and she's hearing noises and all this kind of stuff. And we look at each other and we're talking about this. We're all sitting there eating our pancakes. And this call comes in, and that's the conversation. And we're in the area. It's like, you know, it's about a 2.5-hour drive, and we all said, what the heck? We'll leave our cars here, Gary will take your car, as they always seem to have done. So, we hop in the car and we start heading up there. 2.5 hours later, we pull up in front of this little house, little 2-story house, very small 2-story house. Paint's kind of ragged and stuff. It's 90-some degrees outside, and for northern Minnesota, that's hot. 90-some degrees is very warm. So we get out, we walk along, and all of a sudden we all stop and kind of simultaneously look up. You ever seen those heat waves coming out of the top of houses? Well, this house has steam coming out of it. Steam. We're all carrying our what we call our bundles. They have a lot of our sacred stuff, including our pipes and drums and stuff like that. And then we're walking up, and we get to the door, and we're looking over, and we're noticing that everything's wet. I mean, it hasn't rained in a long time. Everything's wet. The house is sweating. You ever seen a house sweat? You may not have. You have. You just probably don't recognize it. But the house actually sweats. So we knock at the door, and the woman answers. She's wearing a parka. We're like, it's like 90-some degrees. What's going on here? We didn't say that. She says, who's Gary? She says, and I'm standing in back, right? So they're all three of them are kind of insulted. He is. But I said, well, go ahead and talk to Peter. So Peter starts talking. And she starts telling him that she's, every time she walks in the house, she's seeing things, she's hearing things, and the house shakes. And I'm in back of everybody going, and all of a sudden, Peter says, all right, let's go in. And I'm like, this is going to be cool. So we walk in, and as soon as we walk through the door, the temperature drops, I kid you not, from being 90 degrees to below freezing. No air conditioning in the house. What the hell's going on here? We looked at the walls, and the paint on the walls was, you know how the paint bubbles when it gets wet? I mean, and there was water running down the walls. There was water dripping from the ceiling, and the windows were frosted. In retrospect, I remembered seeing that outside, but didn't pay much attention to it. And it was cold. It was cold, man. It was cold. So Peter tells me to set things up. So that'd be my job, because I'm by far the youngest person there. I spread out the star blanket, put all the cedar in the right place, put all the tobacco in the right place, put everybody's bundle in the right place. Peter sat to the east. I sat to the south, sat to the west, and that on the northern side of the blanket. And we all took out our pipes and got our pipes loaded, and Peter took out his drum and he started playing this drumming sound. And just as the first time, immediately when he hit that drum, the house shook. And I about crapped myself. Holy crap. And I mean, and it really shook to the point where the drops of water that were on the ceiling and the walls were starting to come off the walls. And I thought maybe that like the windows were going to break or something. And then just like that, it stopped. And then Peter started talking in Ojibwe, and he explained what was going on to us, right? We all load our pipes, and we've got sage smoke that's filling up the room now. And he wanted it that way. He wanted lots of sage smoke in the room, because what we were doing is we're cleansing the place, right? So you cleanse it with sage. And you may have even heard that at some point in your life. So we're doing that. Sage is burning. The sage that we used, in fact, looks exactly like that. The shell that we're using is down there on the bottom, and told me to go around and smudge the whole house. So I tiptoed upstairs, right, looking around, scared, smudging the house and all that kind of stuff. Nothing happens. Come down and sit down. Peter drummed again, and the house shook again. This time, like a couple pictures on top of her small TV fell on the floor. Peter lights his pipe and he starts praying in Ojibwe. He tells me to light my pipe, and then he tells light his and light his. So we're doing this ceremony, and he starts speaking in Ojibwe. He's speaking a different level of Ojibwe. He's speaking a spiritual level of Ojibwe. So he's talking on this level. I'm catching about every sixth word. I don't speak that kind of Ojibwe. And so he's speaking in that kind of Ojibwe, then he's explaining it to us in a regular realm of Ojibwe. So we're there, we light the pipes, and all of a sudden the place starts shaking, and Peter surprised me because he picked up his drum and he sang a naming ceremony song. And I'm just kind of, and in most indigenous cultures, you cannot pass over unless you've got an Indian name. This has been kind of common knowledge forever. Part of the issue is that Hollywood knows that too. And Hollywood has really grasped a lot of Indian spirituality, kind of mismolded it and put it in all these scary movies that we see. So we're sitting there and we're going about this, and what he does then is he issues this name. And just like that, I mean, very, very quickly, in fact, the temperature's rising. And here's the thing that I'm getting getting goosebumps talking about this. All of a sudden, down the steps, which are right over here as we sit, we see this huge ball of steam go right by us.